Welcome to Stories of Slavery. In today's story, we go back to 1877 to a boy named Silas Bennett. Enslaved at the time, he saved the plantation mistress from a raging bull. But what came next left every witness in shock. This story is tense and emotional, so take a breath, pause, and listen closely. Before we begin, please subscribe and drop a comment telling us which city and country you're listening from. Your support keeps these stories alive instead of forgotten. Let's begin. When they pulled him to the auction block for the second time, the blood on his back was still warm. Silas Bennett was 16. He had just learned the South's cruelest lesson. Saving a white woman's life could be a worse crime than letting her die. This is the tale of a boy who understood animals better than people, who committed the unforgivable act of heroism in 1877 Georgia, who went from the gentlest soul on the Callahan plantation to something even the night grew afraid of. Georgia, 1877. The North had given up on the South. Federal troops had left 3 months earlier, ending what historians called Reconstruction and white Southerners called occupation. In Washington, politicians shook hands over a deal that left 4 million freed people at their former master's mercy. Rutherford Hayes took the presidency, and the South reclaimed its old ways. For people like Silas Bennett, freedom existed only on yellowing paper in some distant courthouse. His father, Moses Bennett, had signed what white landowners called a sharecropping contract in 1868. Moses couldn't read the document, marking it with an X. But the white man holding the pen assured him it was fair. The contract bound the Bennett family to work Henry Callahan's land until they paid off their debt for seed, tools, and the shack they lived in. That debt never shrank, only grew. Each harvest, Moses stood in the plantation office while the overseer, a thin-faced man named Garrett, ran his finger down a ledger and announced the family owed more than they'd earned. Seed prices had risen. Cotton quality had dropped. There were fees for the mule, for the plow, for living on land once worked by unpaid people. Silas had been born into slavery in 1861. Too young to remember the war, but old enough to know his family's new chains were made of paper instead of iron. They cut just as deep. The Callahan plantation sat in Georgia's red clay hills, 3,000 acres of cotton, timber, and pasture. The main house, a white columned structure, had survived Sherman's march by luck, standing on a rise above the workers' quarters. In 1877, 3 families lived on Callahan land, all black, all bound by contracts they couldn't read and debts they couldn't pay. But Silas didn't spend his days in the cotton fields. He had a gift Henry Callahan couldn't ignore. He could speak to animals. Not literally, of course. He didn't hear voices or receive spirit messages, despite what the older workers whispered when they saw him calm a wild-eyed stallion with just his hands and voice. What Silas had was rarer than magic, pure empathy. He could read an animal's fear in its muscles, its rage in its nostrils, its pain in how it held its weight. He moved among horses, cattle, and dogs like one of them, speaking their language of breath and stillness. When Silas was 11, Garrett brought a new stallion to the plantation. A magnificent black Tennessee Walker Callahan had bought at an Atlanta auction for $200. Beautiful and unmanageable. It had kicked 2 handlers and bitten a third. Garrett was ready to have it broken with traditional Southern methods: rope, whip, and the crushing of its spirit. Silas, mucking stalls, heard the commotion. He climbed the fence and watched the stallion rear and scream, eyes white with terror. 3 men with ropes tried to corner it. The horse's fear was so thick Silas could taste it, metallic and sharp like blood. He climbed into the paddock before thinking. The men shouted at him to get out, but Silas ignored them. He walked toward the stallion with empty hands and downcast eyes, making himself small and safe. He approached at an angle, giving the horse space. When he was within 10 feet, he started humming. A low, tuneless sound from deep in his chest. The stallion's ears turned toward him. Silas stopped moving, kept humming, and avoided direct eye contact, knowing it meant challenge. He watched its feet, its breathing, the softening of its neck as terror slowly faded. 5 minutes passed in absolute silence. Then 10. The other men stood frozen. The stallion stepped toward Silas, then another step, catching his scent and finding nothing to fear. 15 minutes later, Silas had his hand on the horse's neck, breathing in rhythm with the animal. Henry Callahan, watching from the fence, said, "Well, I'll be damned. Boy's got the touch." From that day on, Silas became the plantation's primary animal handler, pulled from the cotton fields where his parents and sisters still labored. It was better than picking cotton under the brutal sun, but Silas was careful never to appear too happy. Happiness was dangerous for a black boy in Georgia. It could be taken away just to remind you of your place. He lived for the hours in the stables and pastures, when animals, unlike people, didn't care about skin color or social codes. Animals were never cruel. They never hurt for the sake of hurting. Garrett, the overseer, watched Silas with permanent suspicion. Before the war, he'd overseen enslaved people in South Carolina. After, he drifted to Georgia and oversaw sharecroppers. The only difference was paperwork, and that he couldn't legally kill workers anymore. Garrett didn't like Silas's special position, or that Callahan sometimes spoke directly to the boy. Most of all, he hated that Silas had a skill Garrett could never learn. Boy's got ideas above his station. Garrett told the other white men, needs to remember his place. But as long as Silas kept the animals healthy, Callahan protected him. The plantation owner was practical, more interested in profit than ideology. Silas understood his value was measured in dollars. He was careful, quiet, invisible. The other person who noticed Silas for different reasons was Elenina Callahan. 26 years old, married to Henry for 8 years, profoundly lonely. Raised in Savannah society, educated by French nuns, her marriage arranged over brandy and cigars. Henry was 17 years her senior, a widower needing an heir. Elenina had no friends, no children, and a husband who treated her with distant politeness. She first noticed Silas in the summer of 1874, watching him calm an abused mare. She saw patience and gentleness, rare qualities on a plantation built on force. She mentioned it to Henry once. "That boy with the horses is quite remarkable." Henry just said, "Got a natural knack. Saves me money." Elenina kept watching from her windows, feeling envy for his purpose and skill. The spring of 1877 brought unusual heat. By mid-April, temperatures hit the high 80s. Henry had expanded his cattle operation, buying a prize breeding bull from Texas for $300. The animal was enormous, 6 feet at the shoulder, 2,000 pounds, horns spreading 5 feet. Henry named it Leviathan. Silas was assigned to manage it. For 2 months he worked patiently, approaching and retreating, until he could share the paddock without incident. On April 28, 1877, Silas woke before dawn. His mother said, "You be careful with that devil bull." He gave his usual reply, "Yes, ma'am." He fed the horses, then moved to the cattle pens. Leviathan stood motionless, breathing labored, foam on its muzzle, one rear leg held at an odd angle. Injured, Silas climbed the fence. The bull charged. Silas vaulted the fence just in time as Leviathan splintered the rails. Garrett arrived, angry. "You antagonize that animal." Silas tried to explain. Garrett's hand moved to his whip. "I'll deal with the bull myself." Silas knew better than to argue. The day grew hotter. Henry went to town, leaving Garrett in charge. Elenina, trapped in the house, developed a headache and walked to the gardens. Then she heard chaos from the cattle pens. Leviathan was free, in full fury. Men with ropes failed to corner it. Silas appeared, shirtless, holding a bucket of feed. He walked toward the bull, calm and deliberate. Ilanina watched from behind magnolia trees. Silas set the bucket down, stepped back. Leviathan moved toward the food. It was working. Then a man threw a rope at the bull's horns. Leviathan charged not at him but at Silas. The boy jumped aside, the horn tore his shirt, but missed skin. Ilanina screamed, a piercing sound that turned the bull toward her. She ran, her skirts tangling, and fell. The bull bore down. Silas slammed into her from the side, knocking her toward an oak tree. His shoulder was gored. They hit the trunk as the bull thundered past. Silas stood, bleeding, and walked toward the charging bull. He spread his arms and roared. A primal, terrifying sound. Leviathan stopped, backed up. Silas kept advancing, roaring, until the bull stood still. He placed his hand between its horns. "Easy, boy." But Garrett arrived, pistol drawn. Step away from Mrs. Callahan. Ilanina, on the ground, saw the white men gathering. Their faces told her the truth didn't matter. She would be ruined if she admitted a black boy had touched her. Garrett asked, "Did he put his hands on you?" She whispered, "He startled me." Not an accusation, but not a defense. Silas was bound to the whipping post. Henry Callahan returned. Garrett told his version, omitting the heroism. Henry questioned Silas, who told the truth. Henry believed him but said, "You put your hands on my wife. That can't stand." He sold Silas's contract to the Dade Coal Company's convict leasing system. Slavery by another name. Silas begged. Henry walked away. 2 years in the mines transformed Silas. He became hard, cold, lethal. After a cave-in, he escaped. Traveling south to the Callahan plantation, he freed Leviathan and the other animals, driving them into a stampede. The bull crashed through the main house. Ilanina screamed. Silas watched from a tree, feeling nothing. The animals destroyed the first floor. Everyone survived, but the house lay in ruins. Silas walked away into legend. He lived for 30 more years under assumed names, died alone in an Atlanta boarding house in 1909. Among his belongings, a piece of rope from the whipping post. Ilanina lived until 1923, never leaving the plantation, haunted by dreams of amber eyes and thundering hooves. Silas Bennett's name is in no history book, but his story echoes as a reminder of a society where saving a life could destroy your own.